You don't belong here. Judge Whitaker sneered, his voice dripping with disgust. Once a thug, always a thug. Now, do us all a favor and stop pretending you understand the law. The courtroom burst into soft gasps. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the stenographer paused her typing for a second, eyes wide. But the man standing across from the judge didn't flinch. Wearing a plain gray suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, the ex-convict simply stared ahead, calm and still. His hands were folded in front of him, his jaw tight, his eyes unblinking. He took a breath. Then he said, clearly, confidently, something that made everyone sit up straighter, even Judge Whitaker. And just like that, everything began to unravel. What did he say? Let's go back to the beginning. The old bus rolled into downtown Houston just past 6:30 in the morning, its brakes squealing like they hadn't been oiled in a decade. A man stepped off, holding nothing but a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He took in the street, coffee shops opening, joggers bouncing by, business people on phones already barking orders. He hadn't seen any of this in 12 years. His name was Darius Cole. Once, he'd been known as Stone in the streets, short for cold as a stone, because no one could break him. Not rival gangs. Not even bullets. But prison had changed him. He didn't walk like a street soldier anymore. He didn't look angry or proud. He looked determined. He'd served his time, 12 years for armed robbery and assault. He never denied it. He did it. But prison had cracked something open in him, especially in those last 3 years. He'd joined a law study program inside. Not the kind where they gave out books to keep inmates busy. No, this one was run by a retired judge named Linda Wallace, who believed that even people with the darkest pasts deserved a second light. Don't just survive prison, she'd told him once. Outthink it. Darius had listened. He'd read everything. Case law, trial procedures, how judges make rulings, how defense attorneys win, even when they're outmatched. It became his obsession. Every night, when the other inmates played cards or argued, he sat on the bottom bunk with a flashlight and a book open on his knees. Now, standing in a free world again, he was ready to use what he'd learned. He had a plan. His first stop was the legal aid office. But as soon as he walked in and mentioned wanting to help low-income people with appeals and unjust sentences, the receptionist blinked at him like he was speaking another language. Wait, are you a lawyer? Not yet, Darius said honestly. But I've studied law for years. I know I can help. She gave a weak smile and handed him a pamphlet. We only work with bar-certified attorneys. Strike one. He didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, he walked the streets of Houston in that same gray suit, knocking on doors, sitting through public court hearings, trying to talk to defense lawyers during breaks. Most brushed him off. You're the guy from that robbery back in 2012, right? One public defender had said. I mean, good for you for turning your life around. But this isn't the movies. Strike two. Still, Darius kept showing up. He watched court cases like they were chess matches. He scribbled notes. Sometimes, he whispered answers before the attorneys said them. That's how a woman named Vanessa Brooks noticed him. She was a single mom trying to win back custody of her son after a messy breakup with a powerful politician's son. Her court-appointed lawyer barely remembered her name. One day in the hallway, she saw Darius correcting a rookie lawyer's misreading of a case statute. She walked up to him and asked, "Can you help me?" That was the first case he worked on. He wasn't allowed to represent her officially, but he sat beside her and coached her every step of the way. She won. Word spread. Soon, more people began whispering his name in courthouse halls. The ex-con who knows more law than the lawyers. Some were curious. Some were hopeful. Some were angry. Judge Whitaker had heard the rumors too. Judge Jonathan Whitaker was known for two things, his iron fist and his ice-cold mouth. If you were poor, loud, or had a past, you didn't want to stand in his courtroom. His judgments were swift, often cruel, and he never hid his disdain for people he thought were beneath the law. When Darius stepped into his courtroom for the first time, helping an older man named Mr. Ray who'd been wrongly evicted, Whitaker almost laughed. "You're not an attorney," he said, staring down at him from the bench. "You're not even a paralegal. You're a criminal pretending to be something you're not." Darius stood tall. "I'm here to help this man. I won't speak unless addressed. I'll sit quietly, but I have the right to be present." Whitaker didn't like that, but Darius didn't care. Mr. Ray won that case too. Weeks passed. Darius started showing up more. And that's when Judge Whitaker decided he'd had enough. So one day, during a quiet morning hearing for a small fraud case, Darius stood beside a young man named Justin, who was facing 5 years in prison for a check he didn't knowingly cash. The defense attorney was awful. He didn't even know the difference between larceny and fraud. Darius whispered something to Justin. Justin nodded and asked for the judge's permission to switch representation, saying he trusted Mr. Cole more. And that's when it happened. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and said, "You don't belong here. Once a thug, always a thug. Now, do us all a favor and stop pretending you understand the law." Everyone in the courtroom froze. All eyes turned to Darius. And Darius said something that stopped Whitaker mid-sentence. He quoted a ruling, a very specific ruling, from the Supreme Court, word for word. It didn't just apply, it completely flipped the case on its head. The judge leaned back, stunned. In the room, dead quiet. What did he say? And how did he know it? What Darius had just done might have changed everything, not just for Justin, but for himself, and for Judge Whitaker. But the real battle was just beginning. For a long moment, the courtroom was as still as a painting. Judge Whitaker sat frozen behind his high wooden bench, the edges of his mouth twitching, eyes locked on Darius Cole. The insult he'd hurled just seconds ago now hung awkwardly in the air like a bad smell that wouldn't leave. Everyone, bailiff, clerks, observers, was waiting to see what would happen next. Darius didn't move. His voice had been steady, clear. Gideon versus Wainwright, 372 U.S. 335, 1963. The court ruled that the Sixth Amendment guarantees a right to counsel, and that the state must provide one if the defendant can't afford it. But in Florida versus California, 422 U.S. 806, 1975, the Supreme Court held that a defendant also has the constitutional right to represent themselves, or to choose assistance from someone they trust, as long as they are not obstructing justice. The courtroom clerk looked over from her computer slowly. The bailiff squinted, clearly unsure what had just happened. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "This is not a law school lecture," he said finally, voice cold. "You are not an attorney." "I never claimed to be," Darius answered calmly. "But I do know the law, and I know this young man deserves to be heard, with the help of someone who's actually taken the time to understand his situation." That was the moment. The moment something shifted in the room. Not loudly, not visibly, but it was there. The people in the back benches, everyday citizens waiting for their turn in court, leaned forward just a bit. They weren't lawyers. They didn't know the law, but they knew something real when they saw it. Whitaker stared at Darius, his expression unreadable. "You want to play lawyer?" he muttered. "Fine. Let's see how well you handle pressure." And with that, he slammed the gavel and announced that the case would move forward. Right then, right there, Darius blinked. He hadn't expected that. He leaned toward Justin, the young man beside him, the one facing 5 years for allegedly cashing a fraudulent check from a closed account. Justin was only 19, terrified, and had no idea what had just happened. "Stay calm," Darius whispered. "We've got this." But inside, Darius knew this was dangerous. One misstep, one wrong word, and not only would Justin be sentenced, Darius could be banned from ever stepping foot in that courtroom again. He stood and walked toward the defense table as Whitaker began reading aloud from the evidence list. The prosecutor was a young woman named Erin Walsh, new to the courtroom, cocky but green. She smirked at Darius like she was about to step on a bug. "Let's begin," Whitaker said, already annoyed. "Mr. Cole, since you're so eager to perform, let's see what you've prepared." Darius took a breath. He had to think fast. "Your Honor," he said, steady again. "We'd like to challenge the chain of custody for the check in question. The prosecution claims the check was flagged by the bank, but we've reviewed the timestamps, and there's no official record of when it was submitted or who flagged it. There's only a handwritten note from an unnamed teller." Erin's face paled slightly. That hadn't been in the folder. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying this evidence is tainted?" "I'm saying it's unverified. No witness. No timestamp. No name. Without those, there's reasonable doubt." Whitaker looked annoyed. Not at the point, but at the fact that it was coming from him, an ex-con in a cheap suit. Still, the judge glanced at Erin. "Do you have a response?" She shuffled through her papers. Then, she cleared her throat. It may have been a clerical error, but the check itself matches the account of the employer, and Darius cut in. Your Honor, the employer, Mr. Henry Clark, already admitted under oath in a previous hearing that he never gave Justin any checks. So either someone forged his name or Justin is lying. But we're not allowed to confront Mr. Clark because he's conveniently out of town and sent a written statement. That's hearsay. Another pause. Now even Whitaker had to glance down at the court book. Aaron started to speak again, but Darius pressed on. And Your Honor, we have something else. He reached into his bag and pulled out a printed email. Justin's face lit up. That's it, he whispered. This is a copy of a job offer email Justin received, Darius said, holding it up. It came from an account almost identical to Mr. Clark's real email, but with one letter off. It looks real. Sounds real. Offers a job with a paycheck. But it was a scam. Someone impersonated Mr. Clark, tricked Justin, then gave him a fake check. He handed the printout to the bailiff. Whitaker stared at the paper for a long time. Finally, he said, we're going to take a brief recess while I review this. He rose and stepped into his chambers. The courtroom buzzed the moment he left. Yo, who is that guy? Someone whispered near the back. Man, he just wrecked the whole case, said another. Justin turned to Darius, almost speechless. Where did you find that email? I found the header details in your phone logs, Darius said. Traced the sender through the metadata. Old prison habit. I used to spot fake letters in the yard. Same tricks. Justin shook his head in disbelief. When Whitaker returned 20 minutes later, he looked frustrated, like someone had handed him a meal he didn't want but had no choice but to eat. He cleared his throat. Charges against Mr. Justin Morris are dismissed. The gavel came down. Gasps. Relief. Joy. But Judge Whitaker didn't look up at Darius. Not yet. He simply said, court is adjourned. As people filed out, Justin hugged Darius tightly, not caring who saw. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened without you. You do now, Darius said, smiling softly. But just as he turned to leave, a heavy voice stopped him. Mr. Cole. Darius froze. It was Judge Whitaker. The courtroom was mostly empty now, except for the bailiff and clerk. Whitaker stood at the edge of his bench, arms crossed. I don't like you in my courtroom, he said. I don't like what you represent. Darius didn't answer. But, Whitaker continued, his voice low, you embarrassed a licensed attorney. And, you were right about the case law. Another pause. Darius waited, his heart pounding, but he didn't show it. Don't get comfortable, the judge said finally. Because next time you're in my courtroom, I won't go easy. Then he turned and walked into his chambers, the doors slamming shut behind him. Darius stood there for a moment. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just breathed. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. But just as he stepped out into the sunlight, a voice behind him said, Hey, you Darius Cole? He turned. A man in a black suit stood at the base of the steps. Clean-shaven. Gold ring. Expensive watch. He held up a card. Name's Ronald Keene. I've got a proposition for you. And let's just say, it's going to change everything. Darius narrowed his eyes. The game had just gotten a lot more complicated. And this time, he wasn't sure if he was the one being played. Darius stared at the man's outstretched hand. Ronald Keene. He didn't recognize the name, but the man's posture was corporate slick. Not government. Not a lawyer. But something in between. Maybe private sector, maybe worse. Proposition? Darius asked cautiously. For what? Keene smiled like a man who knew things. Let's not talk out here on the steps like we're about to trade secrets in broad daylight. He nodded toward a black SUV parked at the curb. I've got 10 minutes and a driver who doesn't like waiting. Darius didn't move. His instincts flared. I don't ride with people I don't know, he said. Keene didn't blink. Smart. I like that. There's a diner across the street. Neutral ground. Good coffee. Still watching him, Darius nodded slowly and followed. Inside the diner, the booths were cracked leather and the air smelled like syrup and old bacon grease. The waitress behind the counter gave Keene a tired wave. They slid into a booth in the back, and Keene wasted no time. You're shaking up the courtroom, he said, flipping open a slim tablet. Judges are talking. Attorneys are talking. People are paying attention. I'm not here to impress anyone, Darius said. Keene grinned. That's exactly why they're impressed. He tapped the screen. You embarrassed a sitting judge. Tore apart a fraud case in 10 minutes. That takes more than street smarts. It takes discipline, study, focus, skills we could use. Darius leaned back slightly. Who's we? Keene paused. then tapped the screen again, turning it toward him. On it was the name of a private legal consulting firm, Gray and Low Conflict Solutions. "We do what the courts don't," Keynes said. "We assist with high-profile civil disputes, government overreach, internal investigations. We find people who understand pressure, people who don't panic when the law bends or breaks." "And what? You want me to be a watchdog for rich people?" Darius asked. Keynes chuckled. "No, I want you to be the dog that bites when the watchdog's sleeping." Darius narrowed his eyes. "I've spent 12 years learning how not to be a weapon for someone else." Keynes smiled again, but this time there was something colder behind it. "You may not have a license, but you've got more power than half the people walking around with one. And if you want to make real change, you'll need money, resources, access." He leaned forward. "You want to help people, Mr. Cole? Help them from the inside." Darius didn't answer right away. He thought about Vanessa Brooks, crying when she got her son back. About Justin, hugging him like a kid who just got his life handed back to him. He thought about Whitaker's face, twisted in disbelief that a man he'd mocked knew more about the Constitution than he did. Then he looked Keynes in the eye. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just one condition," Keynes said, voice low. "The next time Judge Whitaker has a case involving our client, you stay out of it." There it was. Darius's stomach sank. "Ah," he said quietly. "So that's what this is really about." Keynes didn't deny it. "Our client is sensitive, powerful. He's under scrutiny. And Whitaker is presiding over a civil suit next month that could cost our client millions." Darius pushed back from the table. "I'm not for sale." Keynes held up a hand. "Think about it. Here's my card." He placed a glossy card on the table and stood. As he walked out, Darius sat there, staring at it. The name, the number, the firm. All it would take was one call. That night, Darius walked the quiet halls of the Community Legal Clinic, a small office space near Midtown that let him use a desk and conference room, thanks to a sympathetic former public defender named Joe Leonard. Joe was in his 60s. His back was bent from years at a desk, and his tie was always crooked, but he believed in second chances. He looked up as Darius walked in. "Thought you were going to celebrate that win today." "Didn't feel like celebrating." Joe raised an eyebrow. Whitaker's face was almost worth framing. Darius forced a smile. Then he told Joe everything. About Keynes, about the offer, about the warning. Joe leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. "They don't offer money like that to someone they think is weak. They offer it to someone they're afraid of." "So what do I do?" Joe gave him a look. "What you've always done. You fight. But they could ruin me. Shut me out of the courthouse. Have me banned. And without a license, I don't have any protection." Joe nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe you lean into what scares them most." "What's that?" "Your truth," Joe said. "Your story. You walked through the fire, and now you're walking into their halls. Every time you speak, you prove their system is broken. You remind them that people can change. And that terrifies them." Darius looked at the old man for a long moment. "Then it's war," he said. Joe smiled. "Welcome to the front lines." A week later, Darius walked back into court, but this time, something had changed. People nodded at him in the hallway. A woman in a sharp blue suit offered him a bottled water. Even the bailiff cracked a grin and said, "Back again?" Darius was helping a woman named Angela Ortiz, eviction case. Her landlord had forged damage reports to get her out before her lease ended. She was a teacher, soft-spoken, and terrified. The kind of person who never made trouble. Until someone made it for her. Darius had her paperwork, photos, even a notarized letter from the building's maintenance man. Open and shut. He thought it would be easy. But when they walked into courtroom 3C, Judge Whitaker was waiting. Darius froze. He hadn't known Whitaker would be presiding over this case. Angela looked up at him, nervous. "Is everything okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just a twist I didn't see coming." Whitaker's eyes met his as he took the bench. The gavel hit wood. "This court is now in session." The prosecution rose. But before anyone could speak, Whitaker leaned forward. "I see Mr. Cole has decided to join us again." Darius stepped forward, calm. "I'm here to support Ms. Ortiz, Your Honor." Whitaker smiled faintly. "Of course you are." Angela looked from one man to the other, clearly sensing something deeper beneath the words. The landlord's lawyer began laying out their case, blaming Angela for mold, water damage, noise complaints. Darius flipped open the folder in front of him. He was ready. The evidence was tight. But then, something happened. Whitaker began interrupting. Constantly. He overruled Darius before he could finish a sentence, dismissed the photos as non-professional, refused to admit the notarized letter, claiming it lacked a date stamp, even criticized Angela's tone when she tried to speak up. It was no longer a hearing. It was an ambush. Darius felt the trap closing in and realized something chilling. This wasn't about Angela. This was about him. Whitaker was sending a message. Darius clenched his fists beneath the table. He couldn't explode. Not here. Not now. He needed a way out. A way around. And that's when it hit him. Something the judge had just said. Something small. Something wrong. Darius's eyes widened, and a spark lit behind them. He leaned toward Angela and whispered something quickly. Then he stood, walked to the podium, and said loudly, "Your Honor, I move to have this case transferred out of your courtroom due to a direct conflict of interest that violates judicial ethics." The courtroom gasped. Whitaker's face went still. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," Darius replied. The room froze. And just like that, everything exploded. Silence slammed into the room like a dropped gavel. Judge Whitaker's jaw twitched as he leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bench. "You dare accuse this court of a conflict of interest, Mr. Cole?" Darius didn't flinch. "Not just accuse, Your Honor. I'm invoking Canon 3C1 of the Code of Judicial Conduct. If a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, they are obligated to disqualify themselves." The air crackled with tension. Angela Ortiz clutched her hands together, eyes wide, as if her case, and her fate, was hanging on some invisible string above her. Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself." "With pleasure," Darius said, his voice steady. "You have a documented connection with the law firm of Gray and Low Conflict Solutions. Your daughter, Ashley Whitaker, interned there last summer. You were quoted at their fundraising banquet 2 years ago, publicly praising their corporate defense strategy. And that same firm represents the landlord in this case." The room went still again. The landlord's attorney shot to her feet. "That connection is meaningless." Is it?" Darius interrupted. "Because we also have a copy of an internal memo from Gray and Lowe stating this case would be handled easily given the judge's consistent understanding of their clients. That memo was leaked to the tenant advocacy group last night. It has your name, Your Honor, and it implies bias." Whitaker's face darkened. He looked ready to explode, but he was cornered. Hard facts, public documents, and now a leaked memo that made him look compromised in his own courtroom. Whitaker opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the courtroom door opened. Click. A man in a brown blazer walked in, holding a folded document. "Apologies, Your Honor," he said quickly. "This was just filed with the district clerk's office. Emergency motion to disqualify presiding judge." He handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. Whitaker stared at the paper like it was poison. The silence was deafening. Finally, with every eye on him, Judge Whitaker said through clenched teeth, "This court is recessed. I will review the motion in chambers." He stood. No gavel. No farewell. Just retreat. The courtroom erupted into whispered gasps. Angela looked at Darius like he was made of magic. "What did you do?" "I gave him something he never expected," Darius said quietly. "Accountability." Outside the courthouse, news spread fast. The leaked memo was already making rounds on legal blogs. Darius's name was there, mentioned in every article as the man who stood up to a sitting judge and exposed a potential ethical breach. Within hours, Darius received 3 voicemails from local tenant rights groups, 2 from reporters, 1 from a podcast host asking for an interview. But one message stood out. It was from Keene. "You made your point," the voicemail said. "But you just declared war on people who play chess at a level you've never seen. Watch your step." That night, Darius returned to the legal clinic. Joe was still there, chewing on a cold slice of pizza while reviewing a thick folder. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "You poked the bear." "I didn't poke him," Darius said. "I threw him off the mountain." Joe chuckled, but then his face grew serious. "You know this isn't over, right?" "Good," Darius said. "Because neither am I." He sat down and pulled out Angela's files again. "We've still got work to do. This judge transfer could delay her case by weeks. That's time she doesn't have." They worked late into the night, drafting new motions, filing paperwork, gathering fresh evidence. Darius knew that winning the battle wasn't the same as winning the war. But now, something bigger was happening. People were noticing. The phone at the clinic started ringing more often. Strangers stopped him on the street to say thank you. And in the shadows, enemies began to stir. 3 days later, it happened. Darius was walking down the sidewalk near the courthouse, fresh documents in hand, when a black sedan pulled up beside him. The back window rolled down. It wasn't Keen this time. It was someone older, colder. A gray-haired man in a dark blue suit with eyes like steel. "Mr. Cole," he said smoothly. "My name is Charles Granger. I represent several concerned parties." "I'm not interested," Darius said without slowing down. Granger raised his voice slightly. "You will be. Because the people I represent aren't as polite as Mr. Keen. And they don't like losing." Darius stopped. Turned. "You threatening me?" he asked. Granger smiled faintly. "Consider it a warning. Back down. Stop the courtroom stunts. Walk away with your reputation intact. Or we make sure that when you fall, you don't get back up." Darius stared at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You think I'm afraid of falling?" And he walked away. But deep down, he knew this wasn't like before. This wasn't a courtroom. This was something darker. And before the week was out, it would get darker still. Because 2 nights later, when Darius returned to the legal clinic, the door was shattered. Papers were everywhere. And in the middle of the floor, someone had left a single sheet of paper, typed in bold letters. "Stay out. Last warning." Darius stood frozen in the doorway, glass crunching under his shoes. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt since the day he walked into prison. Not fear, not anger, but purpose. Because now, they weren't just coming for him. They were coming for justice itself. And that meant he was getting close. Too close. The clinic was a mess. Broken glass crunched beneath Darius's boots as he stepped inside, eyes scanning every corner. Someone had ransacked the place, but not randomly. The damage wasn't wild. No spray paint, no fire, no smashed electronics. This wasn't just a break-in. It was a message, a surgical warning. The file cabinets had been opened, not dumped, just searched. The corkboard where client cases were pinned had been stripped clean. The only thing left was the piece of paper on the floor. "Stay out. Last warning." Darius picked it up slowly, fingertips tingling with something electric, fury wrapped in resolve. His mind raced. Someone wanted to scare him. But not just him, his clients, too. They wanted to shake the foundation he was building, make him feel like none of them were safe. He wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. His phone buzzed. It was Joe. "You at the clinic?" Joe asked, voice tense. "Yeah, it's been hit." There was silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be right there." 15 minutes later, Joe pulled up in his rusty white sedan. He stepped out, eyes wide as he surveyed the damage. "They knew what they were looking for," he muttered. "Didn't touch the front desk or the computers. Went straight for the active case files." "I know," Darius said. "They want us to stop. They want me to stop." Joe glanced at him. And Darius folded the warning note and slid it into his jacket pocket. "It means we're doing something right." Joe sighed. "Then we'd better hit back harder. But smarter. You can't go to war alone." Darius nodded. But inside, something deeper was boiling. This wasn't just about Angela's case anymore. This wasn't just about Judge Whitaker or the smug men behind the curtain pulling strings. This was about a system that had decided who got to speak, who got to be believed, and who got crushed. Darius had been on both ends of it. He knew what it felt like to be voiceless. Now he had a voice. And they hated that. By morning, the break-in had made the rounds. Local news stations aired short segments. "Break-in at Midtown Legal Clinic," the headlines read. They showed blurred footage of the damage. Most treated it like petty vandalism. But a few got curious. One blog ran a deeper story. Ex-Convict turned courtroom challenger targeted in overnight attack. That got people talking. One call turned into 5 into 15. By the afternoon, the clinic's voicemail was full of messages from people wanting help, or wanting to help. Strangers brought locks. A retired Marine offered to install security cameras. A tech student donated motion sensors. Someone even dropped off a brand new coffee maker with a note that read, "Keep fighting. We see you." Darius was overwhelmed, but not surprised. Truth had a way of pulling people together, even when it made enemies. A week passed. Angela Ortiz's case was reassigned to a new judge, Judge Melanie Rowan, known for her even-handed approach and refusal to bow to pressure. Darius entered the new courtroom with Angela and a quiet confidence. She wore a simple black blazer and held her head high, not because she was fearless, but because Darius had reminded her that she deserved to be heard. The landlord's new attorney, a sweaty man with thinning hair, tried to argue that Angela had disturbed the peace in the building. But Darius was ready. He played a video recorded by a neighbor, Angela helping an elderly tenant down the stairs during a fire drill. Then he handed over maintenance logs showing that the water damage had been reported before Angela moved in. He even introduced a surprise witness, the former property manager, now retired, who testified via Zoom that the landlord had forged entries in the tenant files. The case was a landslide. Angela won full restitution, her eviction notice was dropped, and Judge Rowan even reprimanded the landlord for abuse of property law to intimidate tenants. Angela cried in the hallway after the verdict. "Thank you," she whispered. "I would have given up without you." Darius looked at her, eyes kind. "No, you just needed someone to remind you that you mattered." She hugged him tightly. The hallway filled with the hum of applause from a few supporters and local tenant advocates who'd shown up in silent solidarity. But Darius's moment of peace didn't last long, because just as he stepped out onto the courthouse steps, a man he didn't recognize approached him with a neutral face and an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Cole, yeah, you've been served." Darius frowned and took the envelope. The man walked away without another word. Darius opened it carefully. His heart dropped. It was a cease and desist letter from Gray and Low Conflict Solutions, claiming Darius was impersonating a legal representative, interfering in contractual disputes, and engaging in behavior that constitutes unlawful practice of law. The final line read, "Should you continue these activities, we will seek a formal injunction, damages, and criminal referral." Darius folded the letter slowly. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a declaration, a legal war. That night, Darius met Joe at the diner again. They sat at the same cracked leather booth, 2 coffees steaming between them. Joe read the letter and whistled low. "They're trying to put you back in a box." Darius stared out the window. "They're trying to bury me in court filings instead of concrete." "You gonna stop?" "No." Joe leaned in. "Then it's time to hit back. But with something they don't expect." "What's that?" Joe smiled. "A lawyer who believes in you." Darius raised an eyebrow. "You?" Joe laughed. "I'm old and tired. But I've got friends. People who still care. People who got out of the system, but not out of the fight." He picked up his phone and started dialing. "We need someone who isn't afraid to stand next to you in a courtroom. Someone with credentials and a conscience." Darius watched him. Watched the fingers press the screen with purpose. And then, a voice answered on speakerphone. "Joe? Been a long time. Who's in trouble now?" Joe smiled. "I've got a client who's not a client. And a courtroom hero who's not a lawyer. And let me guess," the voice replied, dry and sharp. "You want me to make both those things legal?" "Exactly." There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Tell me where to meet him." Joe looked at Darius and grinned. "She's one of the good ones," he said. Darius leaned forward, curiosity lit in his eyes. "What's her name?" Joe took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Danielle Mercer." 3 days later, Darius stood in a small, sunlit law office on the east side, staring at a framed photo of Thurgood Marshall. Behind him, a sharp voice said, "I read every word of your case briefs. You know more law than some bar-certified attorneys I've mentored. That's rare." He turned to see a woman in her late 30s, hair pulled back, blazer crisp, eyes blazing with intelligence. "I've also read your record," she continued. 12 years. Armed robbery. Assault. Some people will never see past that. "I'm not trying to make them," Darius said. "I'm trying to help people like me. People without a voice." Danielle Mercer walked closer. "Well," she said, holding out a hand, "I'm here to help you get louder." Darius shook her hand. A new ally. A new chapter. But even as they stood in that quiet office, war drums were pounding in the background. Because the letter from Gray and Lowe had triggered something darker. And within days, Darius would learn the truth. They weren't just trying to bury him in lawsuits. They were digging into his past. And soon, they'd find something he thought was long gone. Something buried deep. Something that could destroy everything. The knock on the clinic door was soft. Too soft. Darius looked up from the table, where he and Danielle were sorting through newly filed motions. It was late, almost midnight, and the only light in the room came from the lamp over his desk. Danielle paused, glancing toward the door. "You expecting someone?" she asked. "No," Darius replied. He stood slowly and approached the door. The clinic's new locks were solid, courtesy of a volunteer contractor who'd heard about the break-in, but Darius still kept a small wrench tucked under his desk. Just in case. He peered through the side window. A kid stood there. Maybe 15, hoodie up, sneakers scuffed, eyes twitchy. Darius opened the door halfway. Something I can help you with. The boy didn't speak at first. He glanced around, eyes darting behind him like he was being followed. Then he looked up. You Darius Cole? Yeah. The kid swallowed and handed him a folded slip of paper. He said to give you this. Who did? But the kid was already jogging off down the sidewalk, disappearing into the dark. Darius stepped back inside, closed the door, and unfolded the note. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in a hurry. You think you've changed, but we remember what you did. What you left behind. Someone else might remember too. You open your mouth again, and we open the past. Danielle read it over his shoulder. Her voice was low. What is that supposed to mean? Darius didn't answer right away. He sat down, eyes locked on the words like they might catch fire. Because he knew exactly what it meant. It meant someone was digging into his old life. And not just his prison record. No, this went deeper. To a night he'd tried to forget. To a person he hadn't spoken of in years. 12 years ago, the warehouse stank of oil and gunpowder. Darius stood with a Glock in one hand, a duffel in the other. The crew had planned the job for weeks. Get in, get the cash, get out. Simple. No one gets hurt. But someone did. Because someone pulled a gun who wasn't supposed to. And in the chaos that followed, a single shot had been fired that didn't come from Darius's weapon. When the cops arrived, it was all a blur. Everyone was shouting. Darius took the fall. Said nothing. Protected someone who didn't deserve it. Why? Because once, a long time ago, that person had saved his life. That kind of debt doesn't go away in the streets. But now, someone wanted to use that secret. To smear him. To drag him down. To make the world think Darius wasn't just an ex-con, but a liar who got away with worse. Danielle watched his face carefully. I need to know, she said gently. What are they talking about? He looked at her. I didn't pull that trigger, he said. But I know who did. The next morning, a new article hit the local news cycle. The ex-con legal activist tied to unresolved shooting in 2012 robbery. The photo was old, his mugshot from 12 years ago. Eyes hard, jaw clenched. The story was vague, quoting anonymous legal sources suggesting Darius had not told the full truth in court filings when he helped others. That his past might disqualify him from aiding future clients. It was pure character assassination. Joe called furious. They're throwing mud and hoping it sticks. Danielle slammed the paper down. They're setting the stage to discredit you before the injunction hearing. Injunction hearing? She nodded. Gray and Lowe's legal motion got fast-tracked. A judge is reviewing it tomorrow. They want an order to bar you from entering any courtroom in the district or speaking on behalf of a defendant. Darius breathed out slowly. They're scared. Yes, Danielle said. And that makes them dangerous. But Darius wasn't backing down. He knew this was the moment. The moment they'd been trying to force. A crossroads between silence and survival, or truth and war. And he'd already made his choice. I'm showing up in that courtroom tomorrow, he said. With or without permission. And I'm going to speak. Danielle narrowed her eyes. They'll try to shut you down. Let them try. The next day, the courtroom was packed. Press, attorneys, spectators. Even a few of Darius's former clients filled the back rows, whispering nervously. Judge Melanie Rowan presided, fair, but sharp. Danielle stood at Darius's side as they approached the defense table. Across from them sat two high-dollar lawyers from Gray and Lowe, dressed like funeral directors, confidence oozing from every pore. Your Honor, the lead attorney began. We seek this injunction not out of personal malice but concern for legal standards. Mr. Cole is not a licensed attorney. He has misrepresented his role in legal matters and may be involved in past criminal activity that was never fully disclosed to this court. Objection, Danielle said, voice rising. This is not a criminal court, and no evidence has been presented tying Mr. Cole to any additional crimes. He has only used publicly available laws and documents to assist individuals as allowed under Texas Statute 38.123b. Judge Rowan turned to the table. Mr. Cole, do you wish to speak for yourself? Darius stood. His heart pounded, but his voice was calm. I spent 12 years behind bars. I made mistakes. Big ones. But while I was there, I didn't just sit in my cell. I studied the law. I memorized it. I watched it save the guilty and crush the innocent. And when I got out, I decided to help people who couldn't afford real lawyers. People who slipped through the cracks. He paused, looking out across the courtroom. I never claimed to be a lawyer, but I've helped people keep their homes, keep their kids, keep their freedom. I've never taken a dollar, never lied about my past. And if you want to punish me for learning the rules they tried to use to destroy me, then go ahead. He looked directly at the Gray and Low team. But you're not afraid I broke the law. You're afraid I understand it. Silence. Then, someone clapped. Softly. Then another. The judge banged her gavel. Order, please. The court fell quiet again. But the damage was done. The words had landed. Judge Rowan stared at Darius for a long moment. I will take this matter under review and issue a ruling within 7 days. Until then, Mr. Cole may continue assisting individuals, with the restriction that he does not claim legal representation. Danielle exhaled. That's a win. Darius didn't smile. Not yet. Because as they stepped out of the courtroom into the sunlight, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice came through the line. One he hadn't heard in 12 years. Hey, D. Darius froze. Been a long time, the voice said. His grip tightened. You were supposed to be dead, Darius whispered. The voice laughed. You kept your mouth shut for me once. Let's hope you keep it shut again. The line went dead. Danielle looked at him, alarmed. Who was that? Darius didn't answer. Because the man who had pulled the trigger that night was still alive, and he had just come back from the dead. Darius stood frozen on the courthouse steps, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call had ended. The sunlight seemed colder somehow. Distant. Dull. Danielle touched his arm. Darius, who was it? He turned slowly, jaw clenched. His name is Malcolm. Her brows pulled together. The Malcolm? Darius gave a single nod. Malcolm Knox. His childhood friend. His protector in the streets. The man who'd pulled him out of fights, backed him in corners, and ultimately pulled him into the job that sent Darius to prison. But more than that, Malcolm was the one who fired the shot that night. The shot no one ever traced. The shot Darius never spoke about. Because loyalty had rules. Even when justice didn't. Back in the clinic that night, Darius sat alone at the desk. The lamp hummed. The walls were quiet. Danielle had offered to stay, but he told her he needed time to think. She didn't press. In front of him sat a folder. Inside were documents he never wanted to touch again. Copies of his arrest report, case summary, and an old, grainy photo of the warehouse. A ghost from his past, printed in black and white. He pulled out a small envelope from the back. It had only ever been opened once. Inside was the original plea deal. 12 years for refusing to testify against others. The DA at the time had offered a lighter sentence. Just 6 years, if Darius gave up a name. He refused. Even though he knew Malcolm had vanished after that night. Even though the streets whispered he'd run to Arizona. Maybe even farther. Now he was back. And not by accident. The timing was too perfect. Gray and Lowe had powerful connections. If they were digging into Darius's past to discredit him, it wouldn't take much to find Malcolm's name floating on a sealed witness list. One anonymous call. One quiet offer. And now? Now Malcolm wanted Darius quiet again. But something inside Darius had changed. He wasn't the same man who walked into prison with fire in his eyes and chains on his wrists. He'd done 12 years for a mistake that wasn't entirely his. He wasn't going to carry Malcolm's bullet any longer. The next morning, Danielle returned to the clinic to find Darius already dressed and ready, folder in hand. You look like you're going to war, she said. I am. He handed her the folder. I want you to read that. All of it. Then I need you to make a call. To who? District Attorney's Office. Tell them I'm requesting a private meeting with the chief prosecutor. Danielle raised an eyebrow. You're going to confess? I'm going to tell the truth. The whole truth. I'm not hiding for anyone anymore. She hesitated. If you do this, if you give them what they want, they could reopen the case. Charge Malcolm. Or you. I know. And if they charge you again, they'll try to bury you. Darius looked at her, eyes steady. Then let them try. The DA's office was cold. Sterile. All glass walls and tight smiles. The assistant who led them in was young and awkward, clearly not used to ex-convicts walking involuntarily to speak to the district attorney. But Darius wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't anxious. He was ready. Chief Prosecutor Leon Grant sat behind a long metal desk, reading the folder Danielle had handed over earlier. He was a tall, wiry man in his 50s, with graying temples and an impatient stare. "I've read the report," he said finally. "Why now?" Darius met his eyes. "Because I'm done carrying someone else's crime. I want it on record. I didn't shoot that man. Malcolm Knox did. I took the deal because I thought it was loyalty. But that loyalty almost cost me my soul." Grant tapped his fingers against the desk. "We closed this case years ago. The statute of limitations on perjury is expired. There's no active warrant on Knox. You're not under investigation yet. So why come here?" Darius leaned forward. "Because your office is being used. They're trying to silence me by implying I lied. I didn't. I told the truth, just not the whole truth. And now I'm correcting that." Grant stared at him for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want from me?" "Official recognition that I've submitted a statement to correct the record, that I'm cooperating with any investigation regarding Malcolm Knox, and that my legal efforts aren't being conducted in bad faith. You're asking me to protect your reputation. I'm asking you to protect the truth." Grant didn't answer for a long time. Then he stood. "You'll have it in writing within 48 hours. Darius rose. "Thank you." As he and Danielle left the building, she finally exhaled. "You just gave them a loaded gun." "I know," he said, "but I'm not afraid of truth anymore." She looked at him with something between awe and concern. "You're not scared of anything, are you?" "I'm scared of becoming the man I used to be," Darius said softly. "And right now, this is the only way to make sure I don't." But not everyone was ready to let truth win. Because that night, as Darius walked to his apartment just past 10 p.m., a shadow stepped out from the alley. It was Malcolm. Older, bigger, still wearing that same leather jacket he'd worn the night of the warehouse job. Darius stopped dead. "I was wondering when you'd show your face," he said. Malcolm gave a crooked smile. "You always were too brave for your own good. You sold me out to Gray and Lowe." Malcolm laughed. "Nah, they didn't need much convincing. Just pointed them in the right direction. You made yourself a little too loud, D. Thought someone should remind you of who you really are. I'm not that man anymore." "Yeah." Malcolm stepped closer. "Then why you still look at me like you owe me?" "I don't," Darius said. "I paid for your bullet with 12 years. That debt's paid." Malcolm's face darkened. "You make one more move to bring me into the light, and I swear." Darius cut him off. "You'll what? Kill me? That's what you should have done years ago if you wanted to keep this buried." Malcolm stared at him for a long, dangerous moment. Then he turned and walked off, but not before saying, over his shoulder, "You don't get to be the hero, Darius. Not when the villain's still alive." The next morning, Judge Rowan's decision arrived. Typed, signed, and firm. Injunction request denied. Mr. Cole may continue to assist individuals within legal limits. No evidence has been provided of unauthorized representation or malice. Danielle held the letter like it was a trophy. "They lost." "No," Darius said. "They retreated. There's a difference." He knew Gray and Lowe wouldn't stop. He knew Malcolm wasn't gone. And he knew that the next strike wouldn't come through court documents or whispers. It would come fast, and it would come from the shadows. Because just as they were celebrating in the clinic, Danielle's phone rang. She answered, and her smile vanished. "What?" she said. "Wait. Say that again," slowly. Darius stood. "What is it?" She looked at him, eyes wide. That was Joe. Darius's heart froze. "What happened?" Danielle lowered the phone, voice shaking. "The clinic, it's gone. Gone. It burned down last night." Darius staggered back a step. "Arson," she whispered. "The whole thing's a pile of ash." And in that moment, Darius realized. They weren't just fighting a law firm anymore. They were fighting a war without rules. And the next move? It would be his. Smoke still hung in the morning air. The old brick building that had housed the clinic was nothing but charred beams and blackened rubble. Fire trucks had come and gone hours ago. Yellow police tape flapped in the breeze, a half-hearted attempt to cordon off what was already lost. Darius stood across the street, fists in his jacket pockets, his face unreadable. Danielle stood beside him, silent, a scarf wrapped around her neck against the wind. Joe was there too, his tired eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. He hadn't spoken much since he called. Now, standing in front of the wreckage, he finally said, "They didn't just want to scare you this time. They wanted to erase you." Darius stared at the spot where his desk used to be, the wall where Angela's eviction victory had been pinned, the corner where Vanessa Brooks once sat, crying with joy when she'd won her son back. All of it gone. I've lost everything before, he said quietly. It didn't break me then. It won't break me now. Joe shook his head. It's not just about you anymore, Darius. These people, they'll go after anyone who stands with you. Anyone you help. They're not just trying to stop you. They're trying to make an example out of you. Darius didn't respond, because he knew Joe was right. But what choice did he have? Let them win? Walk away and let the next Angela, the next Justin, fall through the cracks? No, that wasn't who he was anymore. He had walked through flames once. Now he would walk through them again. By afternoon, the news had broken. Community legal clinic destroyed in suspicious fire. Activists demand investigation. But the article didn't stop there. It mentioned the ongoing war between Darius and Gray and Lowe. It quoted sources from tenant advocacy groups. It even named Judge Whitaker, whose courtroom had once mocked the man now standing in ashes. And for the first time, the public didn't laugh at Darius Cole. They rallied. A GoFundMe campaign was launched before sundown. Rebuild Justice was the title. Donations started pouring in, not huge amounts, but small, honest ones. $10 from a single mom, $25 from a retired vet, $100 from an anonymous, former client. Within 12 hours, it crossed $10,000. Danielle sat beside him in her apartment that night, laptop open, reading the donation comments out loud. Thank you for helping my nephew beat a bogus curfew charge. Darius gave me advice when my lawyer wouldn't return my calls. He didn't even know me. The system fears him because he understands it. We need him. Darius sat back in silence. He wasn't used to being believed. Not like this. Danielle turned to him. This isn't a loss. It's a turning point. Maybe, he said. But the people who did this, they're not done. You think it was Malcolm? Maybe him. Maybe someone higher. Doesn't matter. They're all part of the same machine. Danielle folded her arms. Then let's build something that doesn't just fight the machine. Let's expose it. Darius looked at her. And for the first time in days, a small smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. I've got an idea, he said. 2 days later, Darius called a press conference. Not at a courthouse, not at City Hall, but in front of the ruins of the clinic. The scorched building loomed behind him, a symbol of both destruction and defiance. News crews clustered under pop-up tents, their cameras aimed, their mics stretched toward him. Danielle stood nearby. Joe too. Even Angela and Justin came, standing in quiet support. Darius stepped up to the podium. I was never supposed to stand here, he began, his voice clear and firm. 12 years ago, I was locked away. I was labeled a threat, a thug, a mistake. He paused, looking at the cameras. But I studied. I changed. I gave everything I had to help people who had no one else. And for that, they burned this place down. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. But you know what they didn't burn, he said, raising his voice. The idea that justice belongs to all of us. That the courtroom isn't just for the rich or the connected, but for the mother who can't afford a lawyer, the teenager who made one mistake, the tenant who just wants to stay in their home. He leaned forward. I don't have a degree. I don't have a title. But I have the truth. And I have you. And with your help, we're going to rebuild this clinic. We're going to keep fighting. And we're going to show them that you don't need power to make change. You need purpose. Applause erupted. But even as the crowd cheered, Darius saw something beyond the cameras. A black car, parked at the corner, windows tinted. Watching, Danielle stepped up beside him. They're here, she whispered. I know, he said. Then let's make the next move. That night, Darius met with Danielle and Joe in a rented co-working space donated by a supporter. They pinned photos, court documents, and leaked memos across the wall like detectives unraveling a case. They found connections. Clients Gray and Lowe had steamrolled in quiet settlements. Judges who'd ruled suspiciously often in the firm's favor. And most damning of all, a financial trail linking Gray and Lowe to a shady pack that had donated large sums to judicial campaigns, including Judge Whitaker's last election. Darius stared at the web of lines and pushpins, his eyes sharp. This isn't just corruption, he said. It's a system. Danielle nodded. Then we take it down piece by piece. Joe pointed to one document. Start with this. It's the lease agreement for Angela's old landlord, the one who tried to evict her. He's tied to a shell company registered under a firm that Gray and Lowe advises. Find out who actually owns that building, and we may uncover who's bankrolling these attacks. Darius picked up the paper. The name on the lease made him pause. He turned it over, looked deeper into the corporation ID number. And there it was. A connection he hadn't seen before. A name he hadn't heard in court. Malcolm Knox. Danielle saw his face pale. What is it? He owns the building, Darius said. Malcolm doesn't just work with them. He's in with them. Joe's eyes widened. That means he wasn't just a hired threat. He's part of this system now. Darius's blood ran cold. He knew what it meant. They hadn't just come for him. They were using Malcolm as a front to cover illegal evictions, false charges, possibly even laundering money through property deals. And now, Darius had the paper trail. The next move? He would take it straight to court, not to defend himself, but to blow the whole thing wide open. And this time, Judge Whitaker was back on the bench, because the next case was his. The morning of the hearing was gray and heavy, like the clouds themselves were waiting to see what would happen. Darius stepped out of Danielle's car in front of the Harris County Courthouse wearing his best suit, the same gray one he'd worn the first time he stood in front of Judge Whitaker. It was a little tighter now, shoulders broader from long hours of stress and purpose. But it fit who he was more than ever. Danielle walked beside him, a thick folder tucked under her arm. Inside were the documents that could bring down Gray and Lowe and expose Malcolm Knox as more than just a ghost from Darius's past. This wasn't just another eviction case. This was a grenade, filed as a motion to intervene on behalf of multiple displaced tenants. The case accused Malcolm Knox's real estate front of unlawful eviction, forgery, and fraud, and it named Gray and Lowe as knowing accomplices who facilitated the process through coordinated legal manipulation. In simple terms, they were evicting poor people, fabricating legal grounds, then flipping the buildings for profit using shell companies. And the man presiding over the case? Judge Jonathan Whitaker, the man who had once mocked Darius from the bench, the man who now found himself at the center of a storm bigger than he'd ever imagined. The courtroom was packed before the bailiff even called it to order. News had spread fast. Attorneys, law students, reporters, and even courthouse janitors crowded the gallery. Everyone wanted to see the ex-convict face off against a judge and a law firm that had tried to erase him. Whitaker entered in his black robe, face stern, unmoving. He gave the gallery a quick scan, his eyes pausing on Darius for only half a second. No words, no recognition, just a slight narrowing of his gaze. This court is now in session, the bailiff declared. Danielle stood first. Your Honor, we are submitting a motion to intervene on behalf of several tenants displaced from properties owned by West Point Revital Group, which is registered under the name of Mr. Malcolm Knox. Whitaker's face remained still. And your client, Ms. Mercer? Darius stood. I'm not the client, he said. I'm the witness. Gasps swept through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Danielle stepped back slightly as Darius walked to the front, the folder in his hand. Whitaker's voice was icy. Mr. Cole, you do not have legal standing in this courtroom. True, Darius replied. But I have evidence that does. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. Inside were corporate registration forms tying Malcolm Knox to West Point Revital Group, bank transfers between Gray and Lowe's escrow accounts and the shell corporations, fake maintenance reports submitted in eviction cases, identical language, same digital signature, a sworn affidavit from a former property manager who admitted to forging documents under pressure from Knox, and finally, a recorded voicemail Malcolm left Darius days earlier. You were supposed to stay quiet, D. You're messing with more than me now. These people don't play fair. You think they care about truth? About justice? Walk away, or burn with the rest of it. Danielle had cleaned the audio. Clear as glass. Impossible to deny. Whitaker read through the packet slowly. Then, for the first time in weeks, he looked directly at Darius. His expression was unreadable. This is a serious accusation, Mr. Cole, he said slowly. I know, Darius replied. Whitaker folded his hands. You're asking this court to believe that a man with a felony record is exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud ring without a single law degree to his name? No, Darius said. I'm asking this court to believe the evidence. Silence. Then Whitaker said, the court will take a brief recess to review the motion. Gavel. Bang. And the room erupted. Outside the courtroom, Darius paced the hallway like a boxer before a fight. Danielle leaned against the wall, phone buzzing every few seconds with texts from reporters and activists. Are we ready for this to go public? She asked. It already is, Darius said. They just don't know it yet. Joe arrived minutes later, carrying a manila envelope. Got the last piece, he said, handing it over. Darius opened it and smiled. It was the final nail, a notarized statement from a paralegal at Gray and Lowe who had turned whistleblower just the night before. She'd risked everything, job, career, maybe even safety, to hand over a thumb drive full of emails. One of them was from a senior partner, dated months ago. Let Malcolm handle it. He's got the street connections, and the judge still owes us from the campaign fund. Cole's just a distraction. He'll fold. Darius didn't fold. He pressed harder. Back in court, Judge Whitaker entered with a different air. Not nervous, but measured, like a man realizing he stood on a crumbling ledge. He called the court to order. I have reviewed the motion and attached evidence. Given the seriousness of the accusations, I am referring this case to the district's special prosecutor for immediate investigation. Gasps. Furthermore, Whitaker continued, his jaw clenched slightly. This court recognizes the submission as credible and, pending further confirmation, will freeze all eviction-related proceedings tied to West Point Revital Group. The gavel slammed. Darius didn't smile. Danielle didn't cheer. They just stood still. Because this wasn't the victory. It was the first break in the dam. And things were about to flood. That evening, Darius walked the block around the ashes of the old clinic, phone in hand. It buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Guess you got what you wanted, Malcolm's voice said. No, Darius said. I got what they deserved. You always thought you were better than me, Malcolm said coldly. But you're just lucky. Lucky I didn't bury you 12 years ago. Lucky I didn't come back sooner. You didn't bury me, Darius replied. You made me. Every lie. Every silence. Every time I took a fall for someone else, I learned. You put me in a cage, and I read the lock. Malcolm laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're a dead man. No, Darius said. I'm free. And you're about to find out what happens when the people you used to run from finally stand up. Click. He hung up, turned, and saw something that made him freeze. A man was standing across the street in the shadows. He wasn't moving, just watching. Darius stepped forward. Hey. The man turned slowly and walked into a black SUV. No plates, just like the one that had watched him outside the courthouse. Darius's phone buzzed again. This time it was Danielle. Are you okay? She asked quickly. I just got a message. Something's happening tomorrow. A closed hearing. Not public. Guess who it's about? Whitaker, Darius said immediately. She paused. How did you know? Because the walls are starting to fall. What are you going to do? He looked out at the darkness. I'm going to be there. And if they try to block you? Darius's voice was calm. Then I kicked down the door. Because this time, the truth wasn't just coming out. It was dragging names with it. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. It wasn't the kind of busy that comes with routine cases and shuffled paperwork. It was tense, focused, quiet in a way that screamed louder than words. Everyone knew something was about to go down. Darius walked through the main doors flanked by Danielle and Joe. His hands were empty, but his presence alone drew stares. The guard at the security checkpoint nodded at him, just a little too slowly, as if unsure whether to salute or stop him. On the third floor, courtroom 7A, normally reserved for civil motions, was cordoned off. A deputy stood in front of the doors. No public access, he said, glancing at the list in his hand. Closed hearing. Danielle stepped forward, flashing her credentials. I'm counsel for one of the witnesses. Cole is my client today. The deputy's eyes flicked to the list. He hesitated, then opened the door a crack and leaned in to whisper something. Seconds passed. Then the door opened wider. You're in, he said. But don't say a word unless called. Darius stepped inside. The courtroom was smaller than the usual ones, almost intimate. No press, no crowd, just a few key faces. Judge Rowan sat at the bench. To her right, seated formally, was a state-appointed special prosecutor. To the left, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight, was Judge Whitaker. And seated behind him, a man Darius hadn't expected, Ronald Keene, the same polished puppet master who first tried to recruit him outside the courthouse weeks ago. His arms were crossed, his smile thin, like a man still convinced he was in control, even as the walls cracked. Whitaker glanced at Darius as he entered. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was no arrogance, just recognition. Like Whitaker finally saw him not as a former inmate, but as a man standing on equal ground. Let the record show, Judge Rowan began. This is a closed evidentiary hearing regarding allegations of judicial misconduct and coordinated case manipulation tied to gray and low conflict solutions. Darius sat silently beside Danielle. She leaned in and whispered, "Watch what happens next. This isn't just about Whitaker. This is bigger." The first witness was called, the whistleblower paralegal. She walked in pale, nervous, gripping a folder with shaking hands. But when she sat and began to speak, her voice grew stronger with every word. She described how documents were backdated, how eviction paperwork was templated and reused with different names, how judges were selected based on relationships, and how Malcolm Knox delivered monthly consulting payments to an off-book account she claimed linked back to Whitaker's re-election campaign. Every person in the room froze at that. Then Danielle stood. "Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 23 into the record. A transaction log showing a $25,000 transfer from West Point Revital Group to an account listed under Judge Jonathan Whitaker's campaign, filed under anonymous real estate donor. The date matches the month following an expedited ruling in their favor." Gasps weren't allowed, but the silence screamed louder. Whitaker's face remained still, but the sweat forming at his brow betrayed him. He didn't deny it. Not yet, because he knew. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a slow-motion fall from power. During recess, Darius stepped out into the hallway. Danielle followed close behind. "They're going to stall. Delay. Maybe try to settle this behind closed doors." "They're not getting that chance," Darius said. "We take it to the people." "You mean the press?" "I mean the public," he said. "All of them." He reached into his coat and pulled out a USB drive. "What's that?" she asked. "The recording," Darius replied. "Malcolm's voicemail. The emails. The transaction logs. Everything. Edited, clear, and ready." Danielle's eyes widened. "You want to leak it?" "No," he said. "I want to publish it. And I know exactly where." He pulled out his phone and made a call. A woman answered. "This is the Houston Tribune tip line." Darius spoke firmly. "I'm not a tip. I'm the story. And you're going to want to hear this." By 4 p.m., it was everywhere. Exclusive. Ex-Con legal advocate blows whistle on Judge Whitaker, gray and low fraud ring. The article dropped like a hammer. Screens lit up across the courthouse. Lawyers stood in clusters reading the story on their phones. Security tightened. Reporters crowded the steps outside courtroom 7A, pressing their faces to the frosted windows. Inside, Whitaker was visibly unraveling. The second half of the hearing moved fast. The special prosecutor, emboldened by the leak, submitted a motion for immediate suspension pending full investigation. And then he turned to Darius. "Mr. Cole, will you testify under oath?" Darius stood, calm, tall, ready. "I will." He walked to the front and took the stand. For the first time, he faced Judge Whitaker not as a victim, but as a witness. He spoke clearly about how he had learned the law inside prison walls, about how he had watched lawyers ignore the poor, how he'd seen courtrooms weaponized. He told them about Justin, about Angela, about the fire, about the threats, and about the truth. Whitaker didn't look at him during the testimony. Not once. When Darius was finished, there was a silence so deep it felt holy. And then Judge Rowan said words that carried the weight of justice. "Judge Jonathan Whitaker is hereby suspended from the bench pending criminal inquiry. The court recognizes sufficient cause to proceed with immediate review by the State Bar Association and Ethics Commission." The gavel struck. And just like that, the man who had once mocked Darius in open court was now being escorted out by bailiffs. Outside, the cameras swarmed. Darius Cole, what's next for you? Are you planning to run for office?" He held up a hand. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because the people who come into court with nothing deserve someone who won't let them be stepped on. And as long as I can walk through those doors, I'll keep standing for them." The crowd erupted. But Darius didn't smile, because as the applause echoed, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered. Malcolm's voice was sharp, clipped, and shaking with rage. "You just burned everything." "No," Darius said calmly. "I exposed everything." Malcolm spat. "You think this is over? I've still got people. I've still got leverage." "Then use it," Darius said. "Because I'm not hiding anymore." A pause. Then Malcolm said, "You forgot one thing." "What's that?" "You still haven't paid for what you did." Click. The line went dead. Danielle saw the look on Darius's face. What did he say? Darius didn't answer right away. He just looked at the courthouse behind them, then ahead to the road beyond. Whatever he's planning, it's coming fast. Because the truth was out now. But the war? The war was just getting started. And Malcolm's final card? Hadn't been played yet. 2 days after Whitaker's suspension, Darius sat in a quiet cafe, staring out the window at nothing in particular. He held a warm cup of black coffee between his hands, letting the heat seep into his fingers, grounding him. Danielle sat across from him, a laptop open, files spread between them. Public support's growing, she said. Since the article dropped, donations have nearly tripled. 10 more legal aid volunteers signed up. A local firm offered to donate office space. We could open the new clinic within 2 weeks. That's good, Darius said softly. She paused. But you're not smiling. He took a slow sip. Because Malcolm's still out there. Danielle shut the laptop. You brought down a corrupt judge. You exposed one of the most powerful law firms in Texas. People are calling you a hero. I didn't do it to be called anything, Darius said. I did it so people like Angela and Justin don't end up on the street, while men like Malcolm make money off their pain. Danielle leaned forward. What exactly happened between you two? Darius looked down at the coffee for a long moment before answering. Back then, he was like a big brother. Older. Smarter. I thought he saw something in me no one else did. He taught me to survive. But he also taught me to lie, to intimidate, to hurt people when we needed leverage. He paused. Then came the job. The warehouse. I thought we were just scaring some people. Malcolm said nobody would get hurt. But someone did. One of the security guards. He took a bullet. Danielle leaned in, eyes narrowing. And Malcolm pulled the trigger. I never saw it, Darius said. But I knew. I knew. He dropped the gun. Looked me dead in the eyes. I picked it up. Said nothing to the cops. Took the fall. Loyalty. Darius nodded. I thought I owed him. But the whole time I was inside, he built something bigger. He stopped being a street hustler and started laundering money through real estate deals and corporate cutouts. He became the system I'd been studying to fight. Danielle whispered. And now he's trying to finish what he started. Before Darius could respond, the bell above the cafe door jingled. A delivery boy walked in, scanned the room, then approached their table with a brown envelope. For you, he said, setting it down in front of Darius before walking back out without another word. Darius stared at it, then slowly opened it. Inside was a single flash drive and a note. Play this in court, and I promise, everything burns. Your reputation, your clinic, your freedom. Stay quiet, D. It's your last chance. Danielle read the note over his shoulder. What's on the drive? I don't know, Darius said, but his hand clenched around it. But I'm going to find out. That night, in a dim office lent by a local nonprofit, Danielle slid the flash drive into a laptop. A folder appeared. Confidential evidence. They clicked it open. What they saw made the room go still. Audio files, video clips, phone transcripts, all of it meticulously labeled, dating back years. Danielle clicked on one. It was a recording, Darius's voice, distorted by the grainy hiss of an old prison phone. You don't get it, man. You take the deal, you don't come back. You vanish. No more blood on your hands. Not mine either. Danielle clicked another. A video. Surveillance from a courtroom hallway. Darius handing a sealed envelope to a woman. Another. An audio file of a prison guard talking to someone on a burner phone. Yeah, Darius knows everything. But he keeps his mouth shut. Always has. He's smart. Too smart. Darius leaned back in his chair, stunned. They've been collecting on me. Danielle turned to him. This isn't just about leverage. This is insurance. They've been preparing to blackmail you for years. He rubbed his eyes, mind racing. They're trying to make it look like I'm manipulating the system, not fighting it. Twist every win into a setup. If this leaks, Danielle nodded grimly. They'll bury you. Darius looked at the screen again, then slowly shook his head. Then we don't run. We push back. The next day, Darius did something unexpected. He walked straight into the district attorney's office, USB in hand, and requested a private meeting with Chief Prosecutor Leon Grant. Grant looked up from his desk as Darius entered, tired but curious. Back so soon. Darius dropped the flash drive on his desk. They're trying to blackmail me, frame me, ruin everything I've built. That drive contains doctored audio, private surveillance, and bait to make me look like I'm corrupt. Grant picked it up slowly. You sure you want to hand this over? It's poison, Darius said. But now you know what they're playing with. And if they leak it, you'll already have the original. I'm not hiding anymore. Grant raised an eyebrow. You realize this means I may have to investigate you. Then do it, Darius said. If I've crossed a line, I'll take the fall. But if you find out this was all part of a setup, then someone's going to prison, Grant finished. They shook hands. And just like that, the game changed again. The fallout came quickly. By evening, the district attorney's office confirmed an investigation had been launched, not into Darius, but into Gray and Lowe's use of private surveillance and illegal recordings. The statement was subtle, but the implications weren't. Suddenly, the legal community was rattled. Darius wasn't a rogue anymore. He was the whistleblower. But the pressure was rising. Joe called from the new office location. You've got 20 messages waiting. People begging for help. Others offering it. Everyone wants a piece of you. Danielle texted from home. Malcolm's name came up in an FBI sweep today. Someone's talking. And Darius? He wasn't sleeping. Not because of fear, but because he knew. Malcolm wasn't going to go out quietly. He was going to make a move. Soon. And then, it came. Late at night. A call from an unlisted number. A familiar voice. Older, raspier than he remembered. You think you've won, Malcolm said. You think this little parade of yours means something. But I told you, D. You forgot what you did. Darius stayed silent. You think you were just an accessory, Malcolm continued. But what if I told them you knew what would happen? That you wanted it to go down like it did? That you had a reason to see that guard hurt? Darius's heart stopped cold. I've got proof, Malcolm said. Old letters. Testimony. Enough to make them rethink letting you walk around like some kind of angel. He paused. You put me in the fire, D. And now we both burn. Click. Darius lowered the phone. Danielle was already calling. Malcolm's made his move, he said before she could speak. What did he say? That I'm not who people think I am. She paused. Is it true? He looked out the window, then said something he'd never admitted before. Back then, I wanted revenge. Danielle's voice lowered. On who? The guard, Darius said. He used to shake down inmates. Beat them. He made my first year inside a nightmare. When Malcolm said we were hitting that warehouse, and I learned the guard worked there on weekends. He trailed off. Danielle didn't speak. Darius breathed hard. I didn't pull the trigger. But I didn't stop it, either. Silence. And then it's time you told everyone, she said gently, before Malcolm twists it into something worse. Darius stared into the darkness. The truth was ugly, but it was still truth. And if he was going to burn, he'd do it on his terms. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of the world and confess, not just to save himself, but to free the last chain still tied to his past. The press room was overflowing. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking. Reporters filled every seat, murmuring with anticipation, shuffling notepads, setting up recorders. The podium bore a single microphone. No city seal, no law firm branding. Just a plain stand in a borrowed community center. Darius Cole stood behind it. No tie, no script, just the truth. Danielle stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes steady. Joe was in the front row, hat in his lap, jaw tight with emotion. Behind them sat Angela, Justin, Vanessa, and dozens of others Darius had helped over the past year. The room fell quiet as he stepped to the mic. I didn't come here to defend myself, he began, voice clear and even. I came here to confess. The room held its breath. Darius looked up, eyes scanning the crowd. Before I ever helped a tenant avoid eviction, before I stood in front of Judge Whitaker, before I studied law behind prison bars, I made choices I've regretted every day since. He paused. In 2012, I was involved in a robbery. That much you know. But what you don't know is that someone got hurt. A man. A security guard. His name was Thomas Lake. Darius's voice cracked, just barely. I didn't shoot him, but I knew the man who did. And I didn't stop him. In fact, when I learned who was working security that night, I didn't walk away. I let the plan go ahead. I told myself it wasn't personal. But part of me wanted revenge. He gripped the podium harder. Thomas Lake had abused his power inside the prison system. He beat inmates, took bribes, broke lives. I hated him. And in that hate, I lost myself. A single camera bulb flashed. I served 12 years. I studied the law because I wanted to do something good with the time I had left. I came out trying to help people, not because I wanted to be some kind of hero, but because I was trying to make peace with who I'd been. He drew a shaky breath. And now, Malcolm Knox, the man who actually pulled the trigger that night, wants to twist my past to silence me. He's threatened me, burned down the clinic, and tried to make me afraid of who I used to be. Darius looked directly into the camera. But I'm not afraid anymore. Murmurs rippled through the room. If you think that confession discredits me, so be it. If you think it makes me unfit to serve this community, walk with people into courtrooms, or stand beside them when no one else will, I accept that. He paused. But I've never taken $1 for my work. Never lied about my past. And I've never turned away someone who needed help. More flashes. Pens scribbling furiously. And that's not changing. Because the law isn't just about those with degrees, it's about justice. And the people who can't afford representation need more than silence. They need warriors. Reformed or not. He stepped back, voice rising with conviction. So this is me, flawed, unlicensed, and unafraid. He looked at Danielle. She nodded once. If Malcolm Knox wants to come forward, let him. I'll face whatever happens. But I won't stop helping people. And I won't be bullied into hiding. Applause broke out. Then cheering. The room lit up with questions, but Darius raised a hand. That's all I needed to say. He walked off the podium. Danielle caught up beside him. You sure you're ready for the fallout? I've lived in shadows long enough, he said. Let the light come. By nightfall, his confession was everywhere. Darius Cole comes clean and refuses to back down. Some criticized him. Others praised his honesty. But most people just listened and believed him because something had shifted in the city. He wasn't just a former convict anymore. He was a symbol of redemption, of resistance, of what the justice system could be if someone brave enough stood between the cracks. Days later, the final blow came. Malcolm Knox was arrested in a midnight raid, charged with conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and obstruction. Turns out, the flash drive Darius had turned over was only part of the story. Danielle had kept a copy, quietly shared it with a federal contact who'd been watching Gray and Lowe for months. Once Malcolm threatened Darius publicly, they had enough. Gray and Lowe began to crumble, too. One partner resigned. Another fled the state. Internal audits revealed millions in questionable property deals. And Judge Whitaker? He was officially disbarred. No bench. No robe. Just silence. 3 months later, the Cole Legal Resource Center opened its doors in the heart of Houston. Painted blue and gold, the walls were covered in portraits of real people Darius had helped. The waiting room was always full. The phones rang nonstop. Darius couldn't represent people in court, but he didn't have to, because he now led a team of young attorneys, former public defenders, ex-prosecutors who believed in what he stood for. Danielle was lead counsel. Joe taught legal strategy to volunteers. And Darius? He met with every single client, gave them strength, gave them the truth, gave them someone who listened. One afternoon, as he packed up files, a little boy with big brown eyes tugged at his sleeve. Are you the guy who helps people? Darius knelt down, smiling. That's the idea. The boy held out a crumpled drawing. A stick figure in a cape. Brown skin. Big smile. It's you, the boy said shyly. Mom says you're kind of like a lawyer, but cooler. Darius laughed. Danielle called from the office. Hey, superhero, we've got 3 more cases and a press interview in 20. He stood, still smiling. Let's get to work. As he walked back into the clinic, sun pouring through the windows, the past no longer chained to his ankles, Darius Cole knew one thing for certain. You don't need a law degree to fight for justice. You just need courage. And to never, ever back down.